As of recent, there has been a ton of talk in regards to death within Jujutsu Kaisen. How it's handled, how it's written, how good or bad it is, and the reason a lot of people are talking about this is because of the most recent chapters. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of people biting the bullet, you name it. I have seen a large section of people really hate how Kaisen handles its death, mostly because they expect something else. And I believe I know or have at least a good idea on what these people actually want when it comes to death. However, it's not that simple. As a concept, as a writing utility, in-world signifier is very weird. It is handled a multitude of different ways, and sometimes your writing can completely overshadow, backstep, get bodied by just the context of your world. They're not mutually exclusive, they actually intertwine very drastically, and if you aren't really paying attention to what your world is doing, what theme it's actually presenting, what emotion it's getting across, potentially the death that you try to write in isn't going to line up with it. Jujutsu Kaisen is not this. There's actually a lot of variations to Kaisen's death, which is probably why people don't really enjoy how characters go out. But we're going to go through. This is a great example. Berserk is incredibly context heavy, and when you look at its world, when you look at what it represents, the feeling, the vibes that it's getting across, you recognize instantly, without the author telling you, without characters telling you, without even you experiencing it, that death is going to be a vital part of this story. So its value naturally drops. Very standard. Characters are going to be in bad situations a majority of the time, so death is pretty common, and if a main character does die, it's going to be sad but not necessarily surprising. Now this is just crafted by its world, its artistry, the atmosphere that's going into everything. Perfectly normal. The way you write this death now has to be entirely different. You have to put a little bit more thought into it. If you're trying to invoke a certain type of feeling, a certain type of loss, tragedy, something that's more unique, or at least shining a light on said person passing away in this world where death is so common, you have to give it a little bit of love. When it comes to other stories, however, that are the complete opposite of Berserk, think of something that's super bright and bubbly and has no mention or even thought process of death whatsoever, you can use the element of surprise. So you're going along reading a nice romantic comedy driven story, and then boom, someone gets killed, and already you don't even have to really do anything. Leave a like and subscribe. People are so shocked and horrified and upset that a death has actually happened. Authors know this. They utilize this all the time. Sometimes they like to build it up or sneak it in there just to make it a little bit more dramatic, but for most, they don't even. Kaisen is the best of both of these worlds. It can use its contextual world like Berserk that is a lot dark and death is rather common, but also the element of surprise. Kaisen has multiple versions of death that changes to the situation, whether it be the world, an event, or a character. We know that the world of Kaisen, the world of sorcery, the world of curses completely rotates around death. It is incredibly common. Curses have their own version of death that isn't necessarily final but still kind of a reset. And then we have the sorcery version of death, which can be very hateful. It can be explosive. You can actually evolve and turn into something that is very hideous. You can also curse people around you. You can also die kind of in a way that's very shallow and regretful, but also peaceful. The deaths that we have in Kaisen challenge a lot of that vulnerability, and you see it quite often. Nanami is a character that died a pretty horrific death. He wanted to do everything in his power not to curse others. So while visually it's shocking, horrifying, and could easily drive PTSD into anyone that viewed it, leaving some sort of regret or want or need, necessity, whatever it may be, to the person that's viewing it, becomes this ever-living curse. The opposite version of this would be someone like Naoya, who died in a really pitiful way. So much anger, so much emotional fragility that when he died, he evolved into something else entirely, this hideous monstrosity version of himself that was completely void of any sort of human empathetic values. Characteristic-wise, it makes a lot of sense. So you can see now that death usually works best in terms of what it's capable of when it's in conjunction with the person you're writing it for. So instead of just having it be one line straight through, like this happens, that's the end of the story, instead it's going to rotate very differently around the character you're applying it to. Some may be really bad and hideous, some may be emotionally fueled. I think Junpei is a great example of a death that is filled with curse because it's very unexpected, it's problematic, and it leaves this lingering revenge and hatred within Yuji for Mahito. So it's compelling, it drives the story forward, it creates this rivalry between these two very young and up-and-coming characters. Junpei's death is hard because it's brutal, it's unforgiving, and it's meant to be that way. This world is unforgiving. If you want to enter it, this is the potential outcome that's going to come for you. When you look at the most recent Gojo versus Sukuna was something that was built up for pretty much the entirety of the story, right from the beginning. So when you actually get that fight, you know that the outcome on either side is going to be pretty drastic. Gojo's death is something that I feel works great because there's not much context given to it. Just the sheer value of his character being gone is enough. And it kind of sadly works in his favor. The reason that he is so valued within this story isn't necessarily because of his characteristics or even his personality or how he emotionally attaches to people or trains people, this, that, and third. Instead, unfortunately, it's because of his power. The story rotates around his power. Curses rotate around his power. Thus, death is going to act very differently around his power. When he dies, the most value you get isn't this loss of life, isn't this emotional heavy goodbye with someone like Nanami, for example. Instead, you recognize that the most powerful person has been killed, has been conquered, has been completely thrown out the story, and now things get very desperate because we've seen a version of it before just without the death. Shibuya kind of mentally prepped you for it, that if Gojo is taken out the picture, everything goes haywire, curses evolve way too quickly, the world completely changes. So not only this time you get one of the best fights within the story that is so cataclysmic, that is so everything riding on it. The death is sickening. The power is gone. Gojo has vanished, but that's even putting it lightly. That's not to mention the amount of pre-context you get within the chapter that is so beautiful. It's right up his alley and kind of perfect to kind of center within there. You open up the chapter, you read him kind of reflecting and talking with people that have passed away and seeing the future him play out. What choice is he going to make? Is he going to die by cursing other people? Is he going to come back as a vengeful spirit of some kind? What is he going to do? And then you see it. He's on the floor. He's cut in half. It is meant to be as much shocking as it is sickening. The harsh reality of the title or the pillar that he played within this world. This was coming for him at one point or another. And it's only right that the strongest thing in history, being Sukuna, took out the strongest sorcerer of this generation in a way that feels like such a catastrophic loss for everyone. I think you can be very much emotionally sad for Gojo's passing, but I don't think Akutami wrote it in a way where it's meant to make you cry. It's meant to make you sick. It's meant to make you disgusted in what just happened and how he just got treated because you didn't see his death happen in real time. I love how Gojo's death was handled. I think it's a great reflection of his character and a very sad way for him to go because the value that is lost is that of power, which is something. The other one is Kashimo, the most recent one, and you're working in a different playing field here. Kashimo isn't very well known. I like that his death feels very fast. In and out, that's about it. And he fought as hard as he could and didn't stand a chance. I think this does great because you're not disrespecting Sukuna, you're not devaluing Sukuna, you're not trying to give Sukuna a run for his money. He just proved to the world that he can take on the strongest, and even though he may be weakened because of that, this whole state, the new abilities, the form that he's in currently, shouldn't be easily challenged by one person. Kashimo was desperate. Kashimo wanted to have this go, but his death isn't hollow. Instead, you get a perspective that is very, very valuable for this story, and that is Sukuna. If someone as intelligent, as powerful, as thought-provoking as Sukuna actually is, because he's kind of poetic in a lot of ways with how he views the world, how he views himself, how he views power, how he views life and death in general, him recognizing what Kashimo was doing, recognizing how he felt, talking to him, it leaves you with this sense of gratitude. It's sad that maybe one of your favorite characters is gone, but he got the respect from Sukuna. Even though it came in the form of death, having that conversation I think is incredibly powerful. You see why I think it's weird that people have this kind of very negative approach to how Kaisen handles death, when in reality, every death has been handled so differently with so much detail and complexity behind it and variety variety. I've seen a lot of people say that it's shallow, that it's hollow, that it doesn't have any sort of emotional context behind it whatsoever, but that is the most simplest of designs that death actually has. Itself carries a lot of emotional weight. Depending on the context of your world, depending on how the author wants to write it, they can elevate it as much as they want, or they could minimalize it as much as they want and give a lot of context. Choice and variety and the kind of ambiguity of death and being able to utilize it as a narrative weapon is powerful, and that is exactly what Akatami has done in multiple different versions in kind of technically 3 different platforms: humans, sorcerers, and curses. The only rule of thumb that every author should probably avoid, and this is going to ruin a lot of people's days and a lot of people's theories, is that if you kill off a character, commit to it. Do not bring them back, because as soon as you disrespect death, the concept, the idea, the motion of it, you disrespect the reader and you disrespect the idea of your world. It just devalues everything. You will no longer take that story seriously. That's not to say that every author has to abide by that thumb. They can stretch it, they can play within it, they can do whatever they want. If you can't kill off a main character, don't even put them in a position to be killed off. If you kill off a main character and feel like you have to bring them back, you are doing way more damage than good. And it only hurts your story the longer you keep trying to do it.